Hello, future educators. I thought that I would take some time to record a small video for us here on Friday, just to kind of give you some starting thoughts on how to develop a lesson template. So for those of you that want to kind of get a little kickstart on that cumulative lesson plan, this is the video for you. So I want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into what we're going to do for some of those lessons. So ideally for that cumulative lesson plan, we're looking at developing about 5 lessons, potentially a sequence or a series of lessons to teach one of the big topics from that list of topics given to you in Moodle. So just give me a moment here to log in and we can refresh our memory on that beautiful list of topics and where it's located. So inside the Moodle shell, inside the cumulative lesson plan, I now have the lesson plan rubric up for you, so you can see what the marking key is going to be for each lesson. You can also download the lesson plan template here and that list of topics. So what I did was I went ahead and I downloaded the lesson plan template. I jumped over to the British Columbia mathematics curriculum documents and I started looking. I just wanted to pick something that was pretty straightforward for me to kind of give you an example lesson from. So that's what I started with. I have the lesson plan template here. And what I did was I just jumped into the grade 2 mathematics curriculum, which is given here. And I scrolled over into the content. So I think the most important part first is to kind of think about the main content that you want to cover. And then everything else you can kind of build around that content. So what I did was I kind of hovered over number concepts. I wanted to pick something that wasn't in geometry or statistics because that's what you guys are going to be working on. And I went into counting and I looked at the first kind of sub bullet here under counting that says skip counting by 2s, 5s, and 10s using different starting points. And increasing and decreasing sequences. So I decided to pick skip counting by 10s as the specific content that I wanted to look at using different starting points and with increasing and decreasing sequences. So over here on the template, you'll see that under content, that's exactly what I've written down. The number concepts to 100, the subtopic of counting, and inside that subtopic we have skip counting by 10. I'm not going to do 2s and 5s in this particular lesson. I think that would take too long in a lesson with grade 2s, but I do feel like I can cover pretty good ground, in 40 to 60 minutes with skip countings by 10, as long as I kind of vary that lesson up a little bit. And kind of the main goal, we're going to try to start at different starting points and try to get them counting by 10s, both forwards and backwards. So I would say, kind of work on that content bit first. I've also just went ahead and tossed in some information here. I'm building this on January 14th of this year. Of course, as your lessons develop over time, the date of last update could change, right? So it's worthwhile to let yourself know when you last updated this thing. Working with grade 2s, and I just put in a nice little title here that says skip counting by 10s lesson. If this was a series of 3 or 4 or 5 lessons, I might say lesson 1, this, lesson 2, this, lesson 3, this, just so I have a better idea of how these lessons come in sequential order. So just kind of keep that in mind. You can use this lesson to really plot out that sequence if you want. Okay, so I would say once you have the content, what you're going to want to do is maybe skip over some of the other curriculum connections for now, because what we really want to do is think about how we deliver that content to our students. And then we can build the kind of big ideas and the curricular competencies around that typically. Same with the evaluation and assessment and tech stuff. We'll deal with that a little bit later. So what I did next was I moved into the plan. So I tried to kind of think about my plan of attack, what I might want to do to open this mathematical lesson, how I want to go through the teaching aspects of this particular lesson, and how I want to close this lesson. So of course, the big idea, the main kind of goal here is to have my students being able to skip count by 10s forwards and backwards, beginning at any number between 1 to 100. Okay, so that's the big main idea that I'm hoping they take away from this particular lesson. And then I started working on how I'm going to build this lesson. So I thought that maybe a fun way with my grade 2s might be to start with a little bit of a game. So I was thinking maybe I could use some large cue cards. I could write down an assortment of numbers between 1 to 100. And I could flash those cards to the students, and then they could kind of let me know or kind of shout the next number by adding 10 to it. I can alter this game to allow them to tell me the number that would be 10 less than the number was shown. Or we could play some various games where we kind of go around the class. I could cold call if I needed to. I could have students stand up and move around the class and kind of challenge each other. And if things got too loud, I had some options to be able to kind of quiet them down a little bit. But I want to kind of get them engaged a little bit. And potentially moving around a little bit and get them thinking about this idea of working with tens. So that would be kind of my motivation to get them started, get them going. After that, in my sequence, I decided to lay out the lesson in the following way. So next up, we're going to essentially be kind of looking at what we call a hundreds chart. I think I have downloaded some of these. So here they are. So here is a hundreds chart, and just kind of exploring the hundreds chart. So if I start at the number 15, what would be the number that would be 10 more than 15? And then really trying to develop this idea that if I want to move forward by 10, I'm kind of going down in a particular column. If I want to move backwards by 10, for example, moving from 36 to 26, I move up in that column. So our hundreds chart can really help us develop that pattern of moving up or down by 10 by kind of sticking it within the same column. So that was kind of my second step, was I really want them to kind of connect this idea to their hundreds chart that they all should have a copy of inside of their math workbook, or maybe even a nice laminated copy of that they can mark with some dry erase markers. However this is set up, they should have access to one of these charts, and we can kind of work on that together as a class. Once I feel confident that students understand this pattern, we can move on to the second BLM. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means and where these come from in just a second. Sorry, getting notifications on my phone, and I need my phone to just turn over and stop flashing. So here's the second BLM. This is a smaller hundreds chart inside of this handout, and I essentially just wanted my students to start at one of these given numbers and work in descending order using this 100s chart. So just filling in all of these blanks here. And then at the end, I have a little exit ticket that they can write down in their book. When counting by tens, one strategy we can use is, and then we hope that they don't say, look at, ask Colton or whatever. Hopefully they'll come up with a different kind of strategy, one that actually involves talking about this patterning that we talked about, maybe in the tens column, or perhaps this pattern that we talked about by sticking within the same column inside of our hundreds chart. So let's talk a little bit more about what a BLM is, and maybe I'll kind of finish off the sequence. Of course, once the students are done, I assume that they're going to have a math workbook of some kind. They're going to glue that worksheet into their math workbook and then hand that math workbook into me, and that's going to be my form of assessment. That'll be my assessment tool for this particular lesson. They're kind of filled in answers using numbers, as well as that one sentence exit ticket answer. Okay, so that's my summary and review section. This is my prompt. When counting by tens, one strategy we can use is blah. That's already on my BLM. And that's pretty much my entire lesson. So notice that I'm trying not to make this lesson overly complicated. It's not large by any means. This is reasonably executed, I think, in a 40 to 50 minute time frame, which I don't really want to do too much more than that with the grade 2 level anyway. And since we're starting with a game, it's going to feel a little different, I think, and it's going to be a nice little kind of mini lesson and a mini worksheet for them to do here. Okay, and of course, when it comes to review, we have the exit ticket kind of as the summary and review that day. But that's not to say that we can't pull out, this next number by 10 game sometime in the future and play that as a little bit of review in the future, right? I do believe that this should not be a one-off lesson. If we want students to be patterning, we should be able to pull out some of these concepts throughout the school year and practice those concepts throughout the school year. So I would plan on doing a little bit of review there as well. So that's kind of the sequence, kind of my motivation or hook that I would use, and maybe a little insight into how I might do some review or how I might use an exit ticket for some assessment. So there's this thing called a BLM, and I'm going to share with you a little embarrassing story about I was actually my first time actually working with another instructor, and we were talking about how we were going to design some activities for grade 1. And he was like, okay, blah, 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 blah. And then we brainstormed the ideas and we were like, okay, good. We're happy. We can do this. And then he's like, great. So now we'll head home. I'll do this part of the thing. You design the BLMs and we'll be good to go. And I said, sure. And I got home and I was sat down and I'm like, okay, I need to design the BLM. And I was like, what the hell's a BLM? So a BLM is what we call a black line master. It is essentially the PDF or the Word document that you're going to be putting into the photocopier. That's all it is. So anytime I refer to a BLM, I'm just referring to the piece of paper that you may be using in your lesson, and you may have to photocopy. So in this particular lesson, I had 2 black line masters, and you can see it down here in case you forget what BLM stands for. So these would be the 2 black line masters that I would need for this particular lesson. The larger hundreds chart, like I said, I might laminate these so students can reuse them. So I didn't really put anything on my solution key here, but just scrolling down, I did put some solutions in for myself here on a secondary BLM. So these would be things that I would attach to this particular lesson in order. I would put the blank BLMs first. Okay, so notice I have the blank BLMs here as a PDF document, and then that secondary PDF document behind it that has the teacher's solutions. Not that I think it's challenging for us here to count backwards by 10, but for more complicated questions, if you haven't looked at something from grade 5 in a little while, it's nice to have a teacher solution attached with that. Notice that I haven't put a solution in here for the exit ticket because there's various possibilities that students could give as a strategy for counting with 10. So I want to be kind of open-minded for my exit ticket, but there's a definitive answer for everything else. One resource that you can use to find pre-populated lessons in BLMs, or kind of get a jumping point off for that. One group that I've worked with very heavily is called Jump Mathematics. This is a Canadian group that does actually do a mathematical content for both the United States, Canada, and I think they're starting to kind of stretch into some global markets too by the looks of it. But they have free teacher resources. So I do highly recommend that once you've kind of zeroed in on some of the content ideas that you want to talk about for your cumulative lesson plan, come over here to Jump Mathematics, get signed up. And I'm just inside the Canadian page right now. And I have, where'd I go? Maybe I'll just go back. I want to go to resources. So resources for educators. And I just jumped into the teacher resources for grade 2. I was just kind of curious as to what they had. And what I did was, so they kind of divide up some stuff here into lesson plans and black line masters. So you can actually kind of maybe pick and choose some of the black line masters that might be helpful for your particular lessons from Jump. And you can even get a good idea of maybe a jumping or starting off point for some lesson plans. So I kind of scrolled through and I just tried to look for, I was looking for skip counting specifically. So I went into these lesson plans and black line masters and just found some stuff that kind of worked for me. So that's I think a really nice potential resource. It's free for teachers. You just have to sign up to their website. There's no charge to sign up or anything like that, and I'm certainly not promoting Jump Mathematics. I just believe in the materials, that they're a nonprofit, so I very firmly believe in the way that they're tackling mathematics education. So use that if you would like. Of course, I mean, Pinterest is also a lovely tool that my teachers often use to find blackline masters and things like that as well. So now that I have a pretty good idea of what the lesson's going to look like, I can start filling out some of these other ideas. So let's see, like materials. I'm going to start with my number game. So maybe I need some like large cue cards for my number game. Maybe I'm going to need my 2 blackline masters. So of course here you can see in blue it says that we should list our blackline masters and any online resources that we used. So I'm going to use a larger hundreds chart. And that was my first blackline master. I had a second blackline master that was called counting back by tens. Number 2 actually, sorry, because they actually had 2 different ones in the set of blackline masters that I looked at. And then we're going to need some kind of other small things, so like maybe student math workbooks, because I'd like them to glue some of this stuff into their workbook or like write some answers into their workbook. Maybe we might use some scissors, potentially. Maybe some glue sticks might be helpful. And of course the students will probably need some like pencils with erasers and stuff like that. So kind of the typical stuff. But, you know, I would say it's probably better here. Obviously, I'm a math teacher and can't spell scissors. I hate spelling the word scissors. But anyway, try to be as... I would say it's probably better to overlist the materials, because the one thing you don't want to do, especially with a grade 2 class, is all of a sudden be like, okay, glue here, like we need to glue this into your student workbook. Oh no, I don't have any glue to be able to do that with. Probably not going to happen in your grade 2 class, because you're probably going to have shelves and like storage and stuff like that. But I'd rather list all of the things that I think I'm going to need, even if I don't necessarily need them. And of course, I used Jump Math resources online. So that was my one online resources. I should actually cite this. This would be jumpmath.org, actually. I do know that. But well, essentially, I want you to put any references into like an MLA format. And I'm still working on that secondary rubric for kind of the overall cumulative lesson plan. But this would be something that I definitely would want to put into my reference page with that full cumulative lesson plan that you're going to be handing in. So I think that gives me a good handle on the materials. And probably, I mean, I'm not really using technology, so I might say something like, no technology is being used for this lesson. So, I mean, I don't really think technology needs to be used for this particular lesson. Maybe in some of the older grades, you might want to use a computer software, the internet to explore something. You might want to use calculators to explore something. I mean, when I'm skip counting by tens, all I really need is like a hundreds chart and a game in grade 2. I don't really need much more than that, I don't think. So no technology. I think we're good for tech in this particular lesson. And we already talked a little bit about evaluation and assessment. So students maybe glue their BLM into their workbooks. Now, what I probably would do with the BLM is just kind of go through, check for completeness, and correct anything that might be incorrect, or even prompt the student to correct something that might be incorrect as well. This is like an assessment like for their learning, right? I want to use this assessment to try to help promote their learning, and not necessarily mark this as like a hard mark for something. This isn't like a grade 10 or 11 class where I got to be a little bit more strict with my students and actually get some marks. I'm probably just looking to see how things are going, and using this as a way, maybe to use a teaching assistant to help some of my students that are struggling. If I have the capacity to do so, I could take observational notes. And I can probably take those observational notes while I'm playing that game, right? I can kind of try to make note of some of the students that might be struggling, especially if I have the capacity to kind of call on various students, or have students float around the room in kind of an across the world kind of activity. So I could possibly do some assessment there as well. And notice here that I want to make notes of those students that are a little bit stronger as well, because that's going to help me with report cards, reporting to the parents. And I want to also make note of the students that need extra help, right? So maybe that's help with me, just a little bit of extra time, or maybe that's help with an extra TA. I want to make note of both of those things. And you'll get better at doing this along the way, kind of noticing those students that have a little bit stronger skills in something or another, and trying to, if they're being a little bit annoying, because sometimes when they start to get into these kind of like mid to higher grade levels, they start to act out because they're bored. So I want to make note of those students who might be strong, who might start to get bored with this activity, so that I can challenge them with a little bit of differentiated learning. So what I've done down here at the bottom under the differentiation section was just kind of list what I might do if I have really strong students. So I have students who are kind of like acting out, a little bit bored. What are my outlets if I want to keep them thinking about the mathematical activity? So I said that, I might try to give them some more difficult numbers. So we could start working our way into some of these really high numbers, like 70 to 100, numbers that are maybe a little bit harder to think about or harder to pronounce. If that's still going well, I have a lot of options. I could start going into the grade 3 level. I could start doing practice with numbers that are bigger than 100. Can we do something similar for numbers that are in the 200s? That would be crazy, right, in grade 2. So I could start trying to connect this to a grade 3 level content piece. Another option that tends to work really well is to kind of utilize these students as potential teaching assistants. I don't know how well that's going to go in grade 2, but I know that I've seen teachers do this quite effectively in some of these grades, allowing their stronger students to kind of float a little bit and help some of the weaker students. For weaker students, you want to try to build up their confidence. At least that's my perspective. We want to know whether or not it's a weakness because of like lower self-confidence, or whether or not it's a weakness just for the sake of not knowing something. So if it's a weakness for the sake of not knowing something, then we just want to practice with them. We just want to give them more practice. If it's a weakness due to the sake of, for example, self-confidence, we want to try to build that self-confidence and encourage them in some way. So for weaker students, you might want to kind of dial it back to that grade 1 level. Can we start working on thinking about numbers that are 10 units apart between 1 to 20? That would be a grade 1 kind of curricular content. And once they get comfortable doing that grade 1 content, then we can start pushing them into the grade 2 content. Let's start working on numbers in our 30s, and then in our 40s, and then in our 50s, and try to work your way up to some of those scarier numbers in kind of the 70 to 100 range. And weaker students that just need more practice, maybe we can have them practice with one of the stronger students. That's another possible differentiation outlet. I haven't written that down here, but I wanted to show you kind of how we can reach out to the curriculum. So, if I go and jump into those curriculum documents and look, for example, at grade 1 and grade 3, I can kind of see if my content connects to something in the grade 1 level. So, of course, in the number concepts here, we can see counting, skip counting by 2s and 5s up to 20. But I can do a little bit of skip counting by 10s up to 20 as well. And in the grade 3 level, I looked at the number concepts content, and just let me scroll up a bit so you can see. And of course, they now work on skip counting by any number at any starting point, and they're essentially working with numbers from pretty much up to 1,000. That's kind of the big. I can't remember. Oh, number concepts to 1,000. So that's where I got that number from. It was a part of the main content here. So yeah, just I would say, when you're looking at that differentiation piece, it's not harmful to look at what some of the curricular content is for a grade level 1 step less and a grade level 1 step more, and see if you can somehow kind of connect that to the content piece that you're working with. You can't always do this, but it's a really nice, easy way to develop some differentiation for your students. Okay, so I think that pretty much cuts a lot of this stuff. And what I typically try to do at the end is kind of go through the big ideas, the curricular competencies, and the essential questions. So let's talk, now that you have kind of an idea of what that lesson is going to look like, let's go back to the curriculum and take just a little gander at the grade 2 big ideas. Okay, so obviously we're doing content that's connected to number concepts, so I should be looking at the number big idea, which is numbers to 100 represent quantities that can be decomposed into tens and ones. So obviously, that's going to be one of the big ideas. I definitely clearly think we're doing something like that in this lesson because we're thinking about numbers in the tens column, right? So thinking about numbers as representing quantities, not necessarily decomposing anything, I would say, but definitely thinking about numbers as representing quantities and paying specific attention, especially to that kind of tens column. Okay, anything else in here? So fluency in addition, subtraction with numbers requiring an understanding, requires an understanding of place value. So we're not really doing any work with addition and subtraction. So I don't really think that big idea is really going to connect to us. Let's look about the pattern big idea. The regular change in increasing patterns can be identified and used to make generalizations. This is probably a better big idea than even the numbers one, to be honest. I might consider that to be maybe an even more important big idea. Right, because what we're doing here is skip counting. We're really trying to take that pattern that we're seeing and using it to make kind of future generalizations, right? If I know that I'm counting by tens, 30, 40, what comes next? 50, 60, 70. So understanding those patterns, identifying those patterns, like going up and down the column in our hundreds chart. So I think that's a really good big idea that we can connect this particular lesson to. The last big idea is objects and shapes have attributes. We're not really working with objects and shapes. I don't think that's a big idea that I want to bring into this particular lesson plan. So I think those two are probably good enough. Those are going to kind of hit on some of the big ideas that I want to think about. And notice as you hover over some of the highlighted texts here on the big ideas, you're going to get some sample inquiry questions, right? So for example, if I hover over numbers, how does understanding 5 or 10 help us think about other numbers? And what I like to do with these particular kind of inquiry questions is toss them into the essential questions part of this template. So if I just expand this template a little bit and scroll down, there's this essential questions part down here. I kind of like putting the ones that I like into this part of the template. So if I hover back over, how does understanding and then, I don't know, 5 or 10 help us think about other numbers? I think that's a good essential question, right? Especially understanding 10. So I could get a bit more specific, right? I could say, how does understanding 10 help us think about other numbers? Okay, what other questions do we have? What is the relationship between tens and ones? A possible essential question I could put in here. I think there's maybe better, like especially this next question. What patterns do you notice in numbers? That's a good essential question. right? What kind of patterns do I see as I increase tens, as I decrease tens, as I do this on our hundreds chart? What kind of pattern are you noticing? I think that's a really great essential question. How do numbers help us communicate and think about place? We're not really putting these numbers in the context of place in this particular lesson. How do numbers help us communicate and think about ourselves? Again, we're not really making any stories about ourselves for this particular lesson. So, we can kind of hover over patterns and see if anything exciting in the pattern section catches our eye. How can we represent patterns in different ways? We're not really doing that. I would say, how can you create repeating patterns, not what stories live in patterns? So probably not any essential questions from the patterns big idea, although I do think that this lesson does connect to that big idea in some way. So those are a couple essential questions that I might use in this particular lesson plan. And then let's scroll back up. I think we're just missing the curricular competencies. So let's kind of scroll through the curricular competencies one by one and see if we can find any competencies that we can connect our lesson to. All right. So first one is reasoning and analyzing. So are we doing any of the following things? Using reasoning to explore and make connections. I think that's something that the students are realistically doing in this lesson. They're using their reasoning about patterning on the hundreds chart to kind of explore the hundreds chart a little bit more, make some connections to how this is connected to the tens place value column. I think that's a realistic thing here. Estimate reasonably. We're not really doing any estimation here. Develop mental math strategies and abilities to make sense of quantities. I think so. I think we're helping them develop mental math strategies for sure. Are we helping them make abilities to make sense of quantities? I guess, as we start to think about skip counting by tens, we understand what numbers are larger or smaller. So yeah, we could add that in there as well, and abilities to make sense of quantities. Not really using technology. Model mathematics in contextualized experiences. We're not really modeling this in a particular scenario by any means, so I don't think we're really connecting it to that particular competency. So I think that's probably good for the reasoning and analyzing section. What about understanding and solving? So develop, demonstrate, and apply mathematical understanding through play. Say we have our game. Inquiry. We're kind of asking questions about what's happening in pattern and problem solving. I think, yeah, we can probably make an argument that we're connecting to this particular. Can I copy and paste this? I don't feel like typing it every time. You can copy and paste it. Just make sure you reformat it because that looks like garbage. So Calibri 14. So let's go ahead. We're just going to copy paste all the ones we need, and we're going to fix that to make it look better. Okay, visualize to explore mathematical concepts. I think we could probably argue that because we're using the hundreds chart, we're doing some visualization inside of our exploring for sure. Develop and use multiple strategies to engage in problem solving. Yeah, we're developing some mental math strategies. We're using the hundreds chart. I think we can probably connect that to our lesson. Uh-oh, I have a hyperlink. I guess that's the bad thing is you end up getting hyperlinks when you copy and paste. Engage in problem-solving experiences are connected to place story, definitely not cultural practices and perspectives of the First Peoples community. So definitely not doing that in this particular lesson. So I think that kind of takes care of understanding and solving. Let's see what happens when I go to Calibri 14. Oh, look at that. That looks good. I can probably, hopefully, change this back to regular. Just regular font color, please. No underline. Excellent. Maybe I'll actually type out the next ones. Okay, so communicating and representing. We're definitely having our students communicate mathematical thinking in many ways. We're having them do it verbally, by writing. And if we really wanted to, we could have them mark on their hundreds chart as well. So we could do it in kind of a more concrete kind of way with like dabbers or with bingo chips or something like that. So yeah, I think we can definitely connect it to this particular aspect of the competencies. Use mathematical vocabulary and language to contribute to mathematical discussions. A little bit harder here. I guess we could probably make an argument that they're using some mathematical vocabulary if we're talking about place value, if we're talking about the tens column or the tens unit. So you could probably argue that, yeah, we're connecting to this, but I think that potentially we have some better things to connect to. Especially these next two. So explain and justify mathematical ideas, especially with the exit ticket that we've developed in this lesson, where I'm asking students to think about the patterns inside of the hundreds chart, or thinking about patterns in tens. So yeah, I think explaining and justifying is definitely connected to our lesson. Look at me, just stellar when it comes to spelling here. And of course, the last one I think is also a really, really nice one. We're representing mathematical ideas, probably mostly in symbolic form by making them write down some of the numbers. But we might argue that we could probably get some concrete forms here if we had them work on the hundreds chart in a different way. Or if you want to connect this to like a number line or like a ruler or something, you can even try to get like a pictorial aspect in here too. So we're definitely representing mathematical ideas, definitely in symbolic form. And you could probably push that, especially if you added some aspects to the lesson, or added another lesson that maybe connected this to the number line or something like that. So I think those are some really good kind of topics or kind of things that we can connect our lesson to via the communicating and representing section. When it comes to connecting and reflecting, I am having students reflecting on their mathematical ideas in that exit ticket. So that's a little bit of a reflection and a connection there. Connect mathematical concepts to each other. Not really. Incorporate first people worldviews. We haven't really done that. So I don't think we have really any other points that we're really doing here other than utilizing the exit ticket to have students maybe reflect a little bit on some of the patterns that they saw inside of this lesson. So with that, we've kind of developed what I would say is a good framework for our particular lesson. And then I would just go back and maybe just kind of clean this up a little bit so that when I print this off or turn this into a PDF, then it just kind of looks a little bit nicer. So I got this like huge gap here. I don't need this big gap. So hopefully that gives you kind of a rough idea on what I'm kind of looking for as like a structure, or kind of a bare bones structure for this lesson. So just taking some time to kind of think about, how you want to, essentially what piece of content you want to look at, and then how you're going to design that lesson. And then you kind of work out after that, right? Design your lesson, think about how you want to introduce it or end it. If you're going to do something special, think about your materials. And then you want to go back and connect it to the curriculum. So kind of scan through the big ideas, scan through your curricular competencies, and see what makes sense to connect this lesson to. And usually, like I said, I usually grab my essential questions from the big ideas in that grade level as well. So that, I think, would be a fairly strong start to this particular lesson, and then I want to attach my BLMs at the end and maybe attach some references as well. So there you have it. I will post this example up to Moodle for you guys, so you can have a little peek at that and kind of use that as a jumping off point if you would like as well. And I think that just about covers what I wanted to chat about today. And like I said, Jump Mathematics, jumpmath.org if you want some free teacher resources. I will link that onto the Moodle page, and I'll also I'll link in the math curriculum to the Moodle page as well, because I've forgotten to do that for you. So with that said, that will be today's class, or this weekend's class, whenever you decide to tune in and take a little listen. If you guys do have any questions, just kind of start writing them down. And bring those questions to class on Monday, and we can always chat through those questions on Monday. All right, have a lovely weekend, guys, and I will see you next week.